It was one of those crisp autumn afternoons where the air bites just enough to remind you that winter is on its way. David Carter, a single dad with too many worries and not enough hours in the day, stepped out of a small grocery store. His hands were freezing, gripping a paper bag filled with just the essentials. Rent was overdue, bills were piling up, and his 8-year-old daughter Lily was waiting for him to pick her up. He couldn't afford to be late again. But then, he saw her, an elderly woman, hunched over, struggling to balance 2 heavy grocery bags on a narrow sidewalk. She looked so frail, her silver hair tucked under a wool hat, her thin arms trembling under the weight of those bags. David hesitated. He needed to hurry, to get to Lily, but his feet wouldn't let him pass her by. His heart, tired and heavy from his own struggles, wouldn't let him ignore her. "Excuse me, ma'am," he called out, his voice kind but cautious. "Would you like some help with those?" The woman turned to him, her sharp blue eyes studying him carefully before a small, relieved smile spread across her face. "Thank you, young man," she said softly. "That's very kind of you. I'm Eleanor, by the way." "David," he replied, already taking the heavy bags from her hands. They were much heavier than he expected, and he couldn't help but wonder how this frail woman had carried them so far. "Where to?" "It's just a few blocks from here," Eleanor said, motioning down the sidewalk. "I didn't realize how heavy they'd be when I bought them." David adjusted his grip and fell into step beside her. Their walk was slow, partly because of the groceries, partly because Eleanor's pace was unhurried. For a moment, the noise of his own worries seemed to quiet. As they walked, Eleanor asked, "Do you live nearby?" "Not too far," David said, hesitating before adding, "Just a little apartment a couple streets over. It's just me and my daughter, Lily. She's 8. Eleanor's face softened into a warm smile. 8 is such a lovely age. So full of curiosity and energy, I imagine. David chuckled, despite the weight of his day. "Yeah, she keeps me on my toes, that's for sure." He paused, then added with a hint of vulnerability, "It's not always easy, just the 2 of us. But we manage." Eleanor's kind gaze lingered on him for a moment. "It sounds like she's lucky to have a father who cares so much." David shrugged, feeling both pride and the familiar ache of worry. "I do my best." When they reached Eleanor's home, a small, charming bungalow with a garden that seemed as modest yet cared for as its owner, she paused at the gate. "This is me," she said, turning to face David. "You've been such a help, David. I don't know how I would have managed without you." "It's no trouble," David replied, setting the bags down on her porch. "Really?" Eleanor placed a gentle hand on his arm. Her touch was light but filled with sincerity. "You've done more than you know. The world needs more people like you." David felt his face flush at the compliment. He waved it off awkwardly. "Just doing what anyone would do," he said, though deep down, he wasn't sure that was true. Eleanor straightened up with a slight wince. "Would you like to come in for a cup of tea?" "It's the least I can offer." David glanced at his watch, suddenly reminded of Lily waiting for him. "I'd love to, but I've got to pick up my daughter. She's waiting for me." Eleanor nodded in understanding. "Of course. Well, thank you again, David. Truly." As David walked away, his own burdens waiting for him like a storm cloud, he felt something surprising, a lightness he hadn't felt in months. He didn't solve all his problems that day, but in helping Eleanor, he had momentarily quieted the weight on his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself a small, fleeting thought maybe, just maybe, things could get better. It was another chilly Saturday morning, and David was back at the small neighborhood grocery store, his wallet feeling thinner than ever. Lily skipped ahead of him, her ponytail bouncing as she scanned the aisles with wide, curious eyes. David stuck close to his crumpled shopping list, carefully calculating every item he placed in the cart. Every dollar mattered. "Dad, can we get these?" Lily asked, holding up a box of chocolate chip cookies, her eyes bright with hope. David crouched down, his heart sinking as he gave her a gentle smile. "Not this time, sweetie. We've got to stick to the list. Maybe next week. Lily nodded, her disappointment fleeting as she placed the box back on the shelf without complaint. At just 8 years old, she was already used to hearing, maybe next time, and each time David said it, it felt like a tiny weight added to the mountain he was already carrying. As David straightened up, debating whether the milk was too expensive, he heard a familiar, soft voice behind him. David! He turned, startled, and saw Eleanor standing there, a basket in her hand, her green coat buttoned snugly against the cold. Her blue eyes lit up with recognition, and a warm smile spread across her face. Eleanor, David said, a genuine smile breaking through his tired features. It's good to see you again. And you, she replied. What a pleasant surprise. I was just picking up a few things for the weekend. Her gaze shifted past him, landing on Lily, who was examining a display of apples. Is that your daughter? David nodded, glancing at Lily with a mix of pride and affection. That's Lily. She's the light of my world. Eleanor's smile softened. She's beautiful. She waved gently to get Lily's attention. Hello there, young lady. Lily turned, her eyes curious as she walked over to her dad, clutching an apple in her small hands. Hi, she said shyly, sticking close to David's side. David placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Lily, this is Eleanor. I helped her with her groceries a couple of weeks ago. It's lovely to meet you, Lily, Eleanor said warmly. Your dad told me all about you. He said you're very curious and full of energy. Lily beamed, the compliment sparking her confidence. I like to read a lot, she said proudly. Dad says books can take you anywhere. Eleanor's eyes twinkled. Your dad's absolutely right. Books are magical like that. David watched the exchange, a smile tugging at his lips, but he couldn't ignore the small pang of unease that crept in. He wasn't used to strangers showing such genuine interest in his life, and part of him worried Eleanor might see through the cracks. The careful budgeting, the worn-out shoes, the thin coat patched one too many times. Dad, can we get this apple? Lily asked, holding it up with her usual bright enthusiasm. Sure thing, kiddo, David said with a grin, glad for the distraction. He placed the apple in the cart and started to push it forward, but Eleanor's gaze lingered, soft and thoughtful. Lily, Eleanor said suddenly, her tone light and cheerful. Do you have a favorite snack? Lily's face lit up. I love chocolate chip cookies, she exclaimed. David's chest tightened, and he opened his mouth to protest. But before he could say anything, Eleanor was already reaching for the very box of cookies Lily had admired earlier. With an effortless smile, she placed them in David's cart and handed him the money. Oh no, Eleanor, you don't have to do that, David said quickly, his voice firm yet polite. Really, we're fine. Nonsense, Eleanor replied, waving off his objection. It's just a small treat. Consider it a thank you for your kindness the other day. David hesitated, torn between pride and gratitude. He didn't want to accept charity, but the look on Lily's face, pure, unfiltered joy, was enough to break down his resistance. Thank you, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. That's very generous of you. Eleanor placed a hand gently on his arm, her touch warm and sincere. You deserve good things, David, she said softly, her words carrying a weight that struck him deeply. Don't ever forget that. David swallowed hard, nodding as he glanced at Lily, who was now clutching the box of cookies like a treasure. Thank you, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor smiled and straightened up. I'd better finish my shopping. It was wonderful to see you both. Take care, David. And you too, Lily. Bye, Miss Eleanor. Lily called out, waving enthusiastically as Eleanor walked away, leaving behind a warmth that lingered long after she disappeared. David watched her go, a strange mix of gratitude, humility, and something unnameable swirling in his chest. He looked down at Lily, who was grinning from ear to ear, her excitement contagious. Come on, kiddo, he said, ruffling her hair. Let's finish up and get home. As they made their way to the checkout, Eleanor's words replayed in David's mind. You deserve good things, David. It was such a simple statement, but it carried a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. For the first time in a long time, he let himself wonder maybe she was right. It was an ordinary afternoon in David's small apartment, the November chill creeping through the drafty windows. Bills stacked on the kitchen table stared back at him like unwelcome guests, their presence a constant reminder of how close he was to the edge. Lily was in the next room, humming a cheerful tune as she scribbled on a piece of scrap paper, her laughter occasionally breaking through the stillness. For all his worries, her joy was his anchor, the one thing that kept him grounded. A sudden knock at the door startled David. He wasn't expecting anyone, and surprise quickly turned to curiosity as he peeked through the peephole. His breath caught. Standing there, bundled in her familiar green coat and scarf, was Eleanor. In her hands was a small paper bag, her cheeks rosy from the cold and her expression warm. David opened the door, a mix of confusion and surprise on his face. Eleanor? What are you doing here? She smiled, stepping forward slightly. I hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to stop by and thank you properly. May I come in? For a moment, David hesitated, glancing back at the modest living room. The mismatched furniture, the worn-out rug, the tiny heater humming in the corner. It wasn't much, but there was something so genuine in Eleanor's smile that he found himself stepping aside. Of course, please come in. Eleanor entered, her eyes sweeping over the space, not with judgment but with quiet understanding. Before David could say anything more, Lily peeked around the corner, her curiosity piqued. Hello, Lily, Eleanor said warmly, crouching slightly to her level. It's so nice to see you again. Lily's face lit up. Hi, are you here to visit us? She asked, bouncing over with her usual enthusiasm. I am, Eleanor chuckled. And I brought something for you both. She held up the small bag. It's just a little treat, some tea and cookies. I thought it might be nice to share. Lily clapped her hands in delight. Cookies. Thank you, Miss Eleanor. She took the bag eagerly, darting off to the kitchen table to inspect its contents. David, on the other hand, furrowed his brow slightly. Eleanor, you didn't have to do that, he said, his tone polite but firm. Eleanor waved off his protest with a smile. It's nothing, really. Just a small gesture. As Lily busied herself with the cookies, Eleanor took a seat at the kitchen table, motioning for David to join her. Sensing the need for an adult conversation, Lily contentedly returned to her drawings, leaving the two of them to talk. David sat down across from Eleanor, his hands clasped tightly together. So, what brings you here? He asked, his curiosity tempered with a hint of nervousness. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her gaze steady but kind. I've been thinking about you, David, about how much you've done for your daughter and even for me. It's rare to meet someone who gives so freely, even when they're clearly carrying so much themselves. David looked down at his hands, uncomfortable under the weight of her words. He wasn't used to being praised, and hearing it so plainly made him feel exposed. I could see it that day at the store, Eleanor continued, her voice gentle. Even if you didn't say anything, I could tell things haven't been easy for you. And I want you to know. It's okay to accept help when it's offered. David's pride flared slightly, his shoulders tensing. I appreciate that, Eleanor, but we're managing. It's tough, but we get by. Eleanor reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, placing it carefully on the table between them. This isn't about charity, she said, anticipating his protest. It's about recognizing someone who deserves a chance to breathe, to build something better for themselves and their family. David stared at the envelope, his heart pounding. What is this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It's $10, 000, Eleanor said simply. I want you to use it however you need. Whether that's catching up on bills, fixing your car, or saving for Lily's future. I trust you to make the right choices. David's breath hitched, the weight of her words crashing into him. His first instinct was to push it away, to tell her he couldn't possibly accept something so generous. But the truth was, he needed it desperately. The overdue rent, the looming car repairs, the endless worry about providing for Lily, it was all too much. He looked at Eleanor, searching her face for an explanation. "Why?" he asked finally, his voice trembling. "Why would you do this for me?" Eleanor's expression softened. "Because you remind me of someone I loved very much. My late husband. He believed, as I do, that kindness deserves to be met with kindness. And because I see how hard you're trying, David. You've given so much to others. This time someone gave back to you." David felt a lump rise in his throat, his emotions swirling. Gratitude, humility, disbelief. He glanced over at Lily, who was happily munching on a cookie, completely unaware of the momentous offer unfolding just a few feet away. I don't know what to say," David stammered, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to say anything," Eleanor replied gently. "Just promise me you'll use it to make things better for yourself and Lily. That's all I ask." At that moment, Lily bounded over, holding up her latest drawing. "Look, Daddy, it's us and Miss Eleanor." David glanced at the picture. A simple but heartfelt depiction of the three of them standing under a bright yellow sun. His eyes stung as he looked back at Eleanor. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Eleanor reached across the table, her hand resting lightly over his. "You already have, David. More than you know." For the first time in what felt like forever, David allowed himself to hope, truly hope, as he looked at Lily, still beaming with pride over her drawing. He made a silent vow. He wouldn't let this opportunity go to waste. Eleanor had given him more than just financial help. She'd given him the courage to believe in a better future. And for that, he would always be grateful. The winter wind carried the scent of pine and cinnamon as David stood in the small kitchen, a warm hum from the repaired heater filling the air. For the first time in what felt like ages, the oppressive weight of bills, repairs, and endless worry had lifted, if only slightly. The windows were sealed, the car finally dependable again, and, perhaps most importantly, David had taken the leap to enroll in an online electrical repair course. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was a step toward a future he could shape with his own hands. Lily skipped into the room, clutching a colorful flyer in her little hands, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Daddy, look, there's going to be a winter festival. Can we go? Please," she pleaded, holding the paper out to him. David smiled, crouching to her level. "The winter festival, huh?" he said, reading the flyer aloud. "Hot cocoa, crafts, live music. Sounds pretty fun." He chuckled, ruffling her hair. "We'll see, kiddo. If I finish my work in time, we'll go." Saturday arrived quicker than expected, and true to his word, David managed to wrap up his work just in time. Bundling up in their warmest clothes, he and Lily made their way to the town square, where twinkling lights lit up the night like a magical wonderland. The laughter of children mixed with the gentle hum of holiday music, and the air was filled with joy. Lily's hand clutched his tightly as she marveled at the decorations, her cheeks rosy from the cold. "Daddy, can I go make something at the craft table?" she asked, pointing to a group of children painting ornaments. David grinned. "Go ahead, sweetheart. I'll be right here." As Lily darted off, her ponytail bouncing behind her, a familiar voice called out behind him, "David!" He turned to see Eleanor, wrapped in her evergreen coat and scarf, her cheeks glowing from the chill. In her hands was a steaming cup of cocoa, which she extended toward him with a warm smile. "Eleanor," he said, surprised but delighted. "I didn't expect to see you here." She handed him the cocoa, the warmth spreading through his fingers. "This festival has always been one of my favorite traditions. I had a feeling I might run into you and Lily here." David sipped the cocoa, savoring the sweetness as his gaze drifted to Lily, who was intently painting an ornament with bright red and gold. "She's so happy," Eleanor said softly, following his gaze. "And she's such a bright little girl." She is, David replied, pride evident in his voice. She's been through so much, but she's resilient. I think she gets that from her mom. Eleanor turned to him, her expression thoughtful. And you, David, don't sell yourself short. You've done an incredible job raising her. David looked down, his humility shining through. I've had some help, he admitted, glancing at Eleanor with a meaningful look. I don't think I'll ever be able to express just how much you've done for us. Eleanor reached out, placing a gentle hand on his arm. You've done the hard work, David. I just gave you a nudge. And seeing how much you've accomplished already makes me so proud. David hesitated for a moment, then said, there's something I've been meaning to tell you. I started taking an online course to get certified in electrical repair. It's something I've wanted to do for years, but I never had the chance. Now, because of you, I can finally work toward it. Eleanor's face lit up with genuine delight. David, that's wonderful news. I knew you were capable of great things. It's still a work in progress, David said modestly, but it feels good to be working toward something. To have a plan. A plan is the first step to a better future, Eleanor said with a smile. And you're setting such a strong example for Lily. She's lucky to have a father like you. Before David could respond, Lily came bounding over, holding up her freshly painted ornament. Look, Daddy, isn't it pretty? She said, beaming with pride. David crouched down to admire her work. It's beautiful, sweetheart. You did an amazing job. Lily turned to Eleanor, holding the ornament out to her with a wide grin. Do you want it, Miss Eleanor? You've been so nice to us. Eleanor's eyes glistened with emotion as she took the ornament carefully in her hands. Thank you, Lily. This is the most beautiful gift I've ever received. Lily's face lit up, her joy infectious. You're welcome, she said, skipping back toward the craft table. David straightened up, his heart full as he watched the exchange. He looked at Eleanor, the gratitude he felt written plainly on his face. I don't know how I got so lucky to cross paths with you. Eleanor smiled warmly. It wasn't luck, David. It was kindness. And the world needs more of it. As the evening wore on, they shared more stories and laughter, the glow of Christmas lights reflecting in their eyes. Eleanor spoke fondly of her late husband, sharing bits of wisdom he had passed down to her. David listened intently, marveling at the bond that had grown between them. It wasn't just a chance meeting anymore, it was something far deeper. A friendship, a connection, a reminder of the goodness that could still exist in the world. When it was time to leave, Eleanor gave Lily a warm hug and placed a hand on David's shoulder. You know where to find me if you ever need anything, she said. But I have a feeling you're going to be just fine. David smiled, his gratitude unspoken but deeply felt. Thank you, Eleanor, for everything. As he and Lily walked home under the starry sky, the ornament Lily had given Eleanor twinkling in her hand, David felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Hope. With the bond they had formed, the opportunities ahead, and the unshakable love of his daughter. He knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. For the first time in years, the road ahead didn't feel so daunting. It felt like a fresh start. David's apartment felt different, warmer, calmer, and filled with hope. Overdue bills were gone, the car was repaired, and the winter drafts were sealed. Lily sat on the floor, humming happily as she worked on a drawing, her joy infectious. For the first time in years, David felt peace. Their home wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and now, it was filled with the promise of a brighter future. If you enjoyed this heartfelt story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more amazing tales. Your support keeps us going.